Are you feeling overwhelmed by all the mixed messages about fertility nutrition? Maybe you've been wondering if what you're eating could be affecting your chances of conceiving. In this episode, I'm joined by Lily Nichols, a registered dietitian and best-selling author, to dive into the top fertility nutrition mistakes that could be holding you back from trying to conceive. Lily shares how food can support your fertility, balance your hormones, and boost egg and sperm quality, especially if you're over 35 or worried about your AMH levels. If you're ready for clarity and actionable nutrition tips to support your journey, this episode is for you. Feeling like this whole baby making journey is never going to work out? You've done it all, diet changes, supplements, tracking your cycle, and yet the pregnancy test is negative. It's so frustrating, and you're asking yourself, why isn't this happening for us? I'm Susan Gladstein, a holistic fertility coach and mom to 7, including 2 miracle babies after a vasectomy reversal, and I get it. Being told everything looks fine by doctors while still feeling stuck can leave you feeling hopeless and confused. On this podcast, I'll share practical, natural ways to support your fertility without all the overwhelm. Forget the everything's normal talk and the rush to fertility treatments. I'm here to show you a better way. If you're ready to take practical steps that fit with God's plan for your family, you're in the right place. I truly believe that you can have the baby you've been praying for. I'm so honored to be joined today by Lily Nichols. She's a registered dietitian and nutritionist, a certified diabetes educator, researcher, and best-selling author who has completely transformed the conversation around prenatal and fertility nutrition. If you've ever felt confused by conflicting advice about what to eat when you're trying to conceive or to support a healthy pregnancy, Lily's work is a breath of fresh, evidence-based air that you've been waiting for. She is the author of Real Food for Fertility, which she co-wrote with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, Real Food for Pregnancy, and Real Food for Gestational Diabetes, all of which have become must-reads in both clinical and personal settings. So Lily, thank you so much for being here. And to kick things off, can you share a little bit about what originally inspired you to dive into this work and become such a passionate advocate for real food and evidence-based prenatal nutrition?
Yeah, sure. Depends on how far you want me to go back, but I became really fascinated between the link of, what we're eating and our risk for developing certain health conditions or just general well-being when I was a teenager, actually. And so I was one of those oddballs who knew pretty early on that what I wanted to study, and I didn't change my mind about it. That said, I kind of went into my education knowing that the conventional dietetics, like food pyramid sort of way of approaching food was something I had, questions about. I was pretty critical of the evidence used to set those recommendations. So that definitely came with me through all my years of schooling in dietetics and my internship and all of that. It wasn't until I had gotten my RD that I kind of by accident fell into the perinatal nutrition space, specifically in the gestational diabetes field with the California Diabetes and Pregnancy Program. And it was there that I started to get like glimpses of pretty broad oversights that had been made on the guidelines that didn't exactly match up to what I was seeing clinically. And so that kind of set me off down the path of really digging into how the guidelines were set for pregnancy nutrition. Like it started with the gestational diabetes side and then kind of expanded outward. Hence, my first book was on gestational diabetes and was really critically looking at, for example, the carbohydrate guidelines, which are just completely miss the mark. And then it expands out to like literally everything else, right? Just from my work in the gestational diabetes space, by implementing, my own recommendations in lieu of the conventional guidelines, we saw really dramatic improvements in pregnancy outcomes. So, it used to be that like half of our patients in this particular clinic would need medication or insulin. And that was slashed in half by people following my recommendations, which were more whole food focused, protein forward, lower carb, better quality carbs, and focusing on more traditional, better quality fats rather than the conventional, canola oil with everything. And so that really kind of set me off on this path of like, wow, we can really dramatically improve outcomes by changing the way that people eat. So yeah, it's ultimately led to writing. It's led to me writing these books. For a long time I was like, everybody can just, people wanted a book on general prenatal nutrition. I was like, just read the gestational diabetes one because it's honestly very similar. You don't have to obsess over the blood sugar as much, and you probably don't have to restrict your carbohydrates as much, but like it's the same sort of concept, right? And then I went through my own first pregnancy and I was like, okay, there is so much more to dive into here. This really deserves to be its own book. And it's kind of just, snowballed from there.
I love that. And obviously, I've had gestational diabetes in 3 of my 4 pregnancies. And this last one, I had to meet with a dietitian and get educated on what to eat. And I was actually upset and annoyed at the fact that the handout that they gave me was telling me like what I should order at McDonald's or at Taco Bell. And it's like, well, I don't eat at those places anyway. And of course, I had to draw my blood sugar. And even knowing what I know about how the body works, like I could definitely see a difference on nights that I didn't sleep well. My fasting blood sugar would be a lot higher. And so I kind of think for anyone who's sort of struggling, even just knowing or understanding how blood sugar works is so important for just overall health and how you feel and your energy levels and all of that. So I'm curious, what are some of the most important nutrients that women should be focusing on when they're trying to optimize their fertility, improve egg quality, all of those things? Like, what would you recommend?
Yeah, so there's, a lot of overlap between fertility nutrition and pregnancy nutrition. There's also a lot of overlap when you're thinking about blood sugar control with gestational diabetes and also keeping your blood sugar stable outside of pregnancy and before you conceive, because everything is interrelated, right? So some of the things I really encourage people to emphasize is getting enough protein first and foremost. This kind of ticks the box for a lot of different nutrients, actually, not just protein, because when you start looking at which foods are the richest sources of vitamins and minerals, for the vast majority of them, certainly not all, but many of them, you find most concentrated in protein-rich foods, especially things like iron, zinc, vitamin B12, selenium, vitamin B6, choline, vitamin A. Like I can keep going. There's a whole long list of nutrients that are most concentrated in our protein foods. And if you lead with protein first, you're going to get most of your nutrient needs.
Well, and I appreciate that you're talking about like protein leading foods to get the vitamins that you need because all of the things that you rattled off are all of the things that I see constantly. People are asking about supplementing, or that's what they're the supplements that they're taking. And so I love that just like understanding that if you're leading with protein and maximizing that, then you're getting a lot of the nutrients that you need that people are seeking out through supplementation, but you can do that with actual real food.
Yeah, 100%. And then you're getting more than just the micronutrients because you're also getting many of these amino acids that you're not going to be getting from a multivitamin necessarily. And those have roles in fertility, especially when you're looking at some of the amino acids that you find only in animal foods like carnitine and creatine and taurine. There's really, really interesting research looking into the roles for those amino acids and things like semen quality and egg quality and menstrual cycle regularity. And if we're just like filling in the gaps with supplements, but we're not actually eating enough food, we run into issues, especially for female fertility. If you're under eating, which so many women are, that tanks your reproductive hormone levels more than anything else. So maybe even before going into the protein side, I should say eating enough food is the first step. That's like the biggest step that you cannot skip. And then you want to optimize your protein intake. Further to that, you don't want to be taking the fat out of all of your protein-rich foods because you need fat and the cholesterol that comes in animal foods, for example, to build your sex steroid hormones. So they've actually done studies where they restrict dietary fat intake among women. And when you restrict it too much, you see huge drops in estrogen and progesterone levels. Well, guess what? That, of course, impacts your ovulatory function and also your ability to get pregnant and sustain a pregnancy, especially as you're like leading into pregnancy, a time when you're going to have massive increases in your hormone production. You want to be going into that pretty well nourished. Um, and then if I'm just going to continue down the train of macronutrients, the last thing I focus on with people is quality carbohydrates. We're in a situation in the US where the vast majority of our calories are coming from ultra processed foods. Like one of the latest studies I saw said 58% of the average American's calories are coming from ultra processed foods. Well, what makes up ultra processed foods? Most of it is processed carbohydrates. It's either like super processed refined carbohydrates and added sugars or really low quality oils. Think about all the things that go into your like a little Debbie bar, like I don't know, those sweets and treats and ultra processed cereals and all of that. And what happens when we're getting most of our food from those sources? Well, we're undernourished because we're not getting enough nutrients. We're also having huge blood sugar swings and we're not getting enough protein. I mean, with few exceptions, most of our ultra processed foods are low in protein. So it leaves that huge gap as well. So if we could just shift towards better quality carbohydrates, the whole fruits, the vegetables, the legumes, whole grains, if they agree with your body. Like if we eat more of those foods and less of the white flour products and the added sugar products, we're going to see dramatic improvements in health across the board. So that would be like the last major focus in terms of the macronutrients.
It's I really love all of that because I've personally struggled with blood sugar issues. Like I was a former Dr. Pepper addict. I grew up in Texas, so it was the land of sweet tea. And after I realized, I mean, I spent a lot of money on like skin care regimens, laser treatments to fix acne problems that all resolved themselves when I cut out my sugar intake. But even artificial sweeteners and things were causing a ton of digestive issues and migraines for me. And it was like the packaged protein bars and shakes that were labeled as like healthy or low carb, and they were literally making me sick. I mean, nobody wants to feel like they're gonna poop their pants while they're at the squat rack, but like that was my life, and I just had accepted that as normal. And I don't think I knew how bad I felt until I felt good. And so I a lot of people that come to me, they'll say like, oh, I eat healthy or whatever. They maybe prescribe to a certain diet, or I get a lot of like, oh, my husband's on keto and, he's lost all this weight and whatever. But like when I'm looking at it, he's not really optimizing his nutrition in the way that he should. So, what are some common dietary mistakes that you see people making that may unintentionally hinder their conception ability?
Yeah, well, I think you highlighted a couple right there, like trying to fit your macros or something, but you're doing it with all processed foods. Like a ketogenic diet can be really therapeutic for some individuals. It's not my default recommendation, but for some individuals, it actually is the appropriate nutritional intervention. But there can be like a really low quality, nutrient devoid keto diet that's all keto bars and keto shakes and all the processed foods labeled keto, some of which aren't even keto, right? A lot of it, they lie on the labels. It can still spike your blood sugar, but nonetheless, it could be like a really low quality keto diet, or you can simply be eating like fish, meat, chicken, uh, nuts and seeds, eggs, Greek yogurt, fruits, low carb fruits like berries, all of your green vegetables, big salads, avocado. Like you can have a keto diet that's built on whole foods that's wonderful for your body, or you can have a keto diet that's like doing harm. So the conversation about processed foods, I think, is important regardless of what your like macronutrient goals are. There's consequences to cutting all the corners on the food prep, unfortunately. I wish I could spend less time in the kitchen, but anytime I try to, it doesn't work out that well, and we don't feel well, right? It's like, oh, okay, we'll just do this like frozen dinner because I'm overwhelmed and it'll be easier. And then it's like, A, this didn't taste good. B, it costs a lot more. And C, we all feel like crap for 2 days. Like, okay, next time I'm planning better and I'm just cooking at home, right? We all learn the hard way sometimes. Another thing would be alcohol intake. Alcohol can really put an excess load on your liver. It can impact estrogen levels. It could drive estrogen levels up in both men and women. That can be problematic. Usually it's like the not as good for you estrogen metabolites that you start spiking when you consume too much alcohol. So be conscious of it. Everybody has a different tolerance level. I'm not saying you have to cut it out completely, but many individuals do need to cut down. Um, Another one would be switching over to a plant-based diet. There's all sorts of incorrect information that is relayed from the nutrition research about plant-based versus animal-based foods. And some of this you actually have to like really dig into the specifics of the study to pull out the actual data because what's written in the study does not accurately reflect their data. I did a whole deep dive in this in chapter 5 of Real Food for Fertility. It's actually wild when you dive into some of these studies that are saying animal protein is bad for fertility, but their data actually says the opposite. So you have to be really careful. Don't just skim the study abstract and their conclusions. They're not always reflecting what they found in the actual research study. And I will tell you that one of the major detrimental effects that we see on fertility is in women who decrease their animal food consumption and start eating the processed plant-based meat alternatives in their place. There was actually a really interesting study that looked at protein-rich foods and their relation to ovulatory function. So how well are your ovaries working and how good is your ovulation essentially? So they looked at this huge group of women and they gave all the little data points for the specific types of protein. And funny enough, like their study title made it sound like plant protein is superior to animal protein when it comes to ovulation. But when you actually read into the specifics, the one of the items that was actually the most detrimental to ovulatory function was the meat alternatives. Most of these are made with soy protein, by the way, but it was the meat alternatives that scored way less. You look at the animal proteins, vast majority of them were actually fine, like no correlation or slightly beneficial, and they could not explain away why processed meat actually was the most protective of ovulatory function. Go figure, because everybody always wants to throw processed meat under the bus. And I'm not saying that all processed meat is good for you. A lot of it has a ton of awful additives. But I think what may have been going on there was that for a lot of people, processed meat contributes pretty substantially to their fat intake, especially their saturated fat intake. And when you start looking at the types of fats and what's associated with better fertility, it's the saturated and monounsaturated fats. Those are the ones that you're going to find in your bacon, for example. Lard is like 40% monounsaturated fat. Go figure, right? We all think of olive oil. Olive oil is great too, but like I think there was an association there that they didn't want to admit in the study results. So a major one would be, yeah, thinking about like, are you still getting some animal foods in your diet? They provide really high quality protein, an array of micronutrients, and they also give you the fat necessary for hormone production. So the whole story we're told about going plant-based to optimize your fertility usually doesn't work out. Like the most challenging clinical cases that I've ever had are in clients who are very strictly vegan or strict vegetarian, who are not eating enough eggs and dairy products, for example. I think those probably hit on like some of the biggest ones, but of course, there's potential other ones we could go into too.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about like the vegan and vegetarian because I've run across, couples where maybe the man was having hormone issues, but he was also, vegetarian or vegan. And what would you recommend to people who are in that sort of boat that's like, well, I don't want to do animal products, but I want to have a baby like yesterday. So, what is some advice
Yeah.
for them nutritionally to help with sort of balancing that out?
It's it's a challenging one. I mean, we decided to include an entire chapter actually on vegetarian diets and real food for fertility to go through point by point all the various considerations because I think the way that it's typically looked at in the conventional lens, because conventional dietetics is full on vegetarian and vegan diets can be appropriate for all life stages as long as they're planned carefully and supplemented. But then you dive into like what the recommendations actually are, and it's not specific enough to actually address all of the issues, and they also don't go into all the potential dietary holes with that approach to eating. So it's more complicated than just supplement with vitamin B12 and check your iron levels. Like it is far more complicated than that. So, some people physiologically can do okay on a vegetarian diet if they're including eggs and full fat dairy products and they're supplementing with some of the missing nutrients. So maybe they're doing that, a lacto-ovo vegetarian diet that's very like as protein forward as you can. So prioritizing like Greek yogurt and cheese and cottage cheese as their dairy sources. Um, Adding in beans and legumes, but keeping soy intake at a minimum because the soy is so high in phytoestrogens that it can actually throw off reproductive hormone levels in a lot of people. And I go into that research in Real Food for Fertility if people don't believe me. There's a ton of research on this. Especially for men, they need to be like really careful with the quantity of soy they're consuming. So that can be done, right? You make those shifts. We have to be cautious about the quantity of additional carbohydrates coming in because the big challenge on vegetarian eating patterns is you end up with a higher carb intake because really all plants have carbs. So, I mean, there you go. But even as you try to optimize your protein intake on such a diet, all of the vegetarian sources of protein, unless they've been processed to remove everything else, they have carbs too. So, lentils and beans have protein, yes, but they also have carbs. So if you're having, beans and rice at a meal, plus you're having all these other plants at that meal, you may just be getting like a lot more carbs than your particular physiology can handle without blood sugar spikes. So we just have to be careful on the quantity of starchy foods like potatoes, sweet potatoes, and grains, and try to really prioritize the higher protein carb sources like beans and legumes to like shift that macro balance. And then absolutely you need to supplement. So really high quality comprehensive prenatal that's high in B12. Many people need an iron supplement. Many people need zinc supplementation. Many people need additional choline. Vitamin D, that goes for everybody, vegetarian or not, unless you get a ton of sun exposure. You probably need an algae-based DHA supplement. So there's options to try to optimize, but I will just say I've had clients that do all that. They do it all perfectly to the letter. All the tips to optimize a vegetarian diet that we outline in the fertility chapter, they're doing all of it. And it's still not moving the needle enough for them to be able to conceive. And that's when you have to kind of get real with yourself and be like, okay, why am I eating this particular way? Like, what drew me to a vegetarian or vegan diet? And does that same rationale, does it still hold true for where I'm at right now? Because my goal right now is to have a baby. And like it's not happening with doing all the things that I'm doing. So So reevaluate what is the reason for doing this. I mean, there's some people who there's no changing their mind because it might be like a religious or ethical reason, and I totally get it. Maybe there's room to further optimize the supplementation. You'd want to work with like a really well-trained dietitian or a nutritionist on this to figure that out. Maybe some specific amino acids, for example, but really like dig into the specifics of the why, and then you can choose where you want to go from there. Is it trying to hyper optimize all the supplementation? Some people, when they get into like the ethical or ecological battle, they're like, okay, I'm taking all these isolated supplements that require shipping and plastic and packaging. Like, am I damaging the environment more? Like it gets into all these other like non-nutritional areas. And so just sit with it. And if you decide you want to include some animal foods, like sometimes I'll have people who will decide that they'll include oysters, clams, or mussels because bivalve shellfish don't have a central nervous system and therefore don't feel pain. So if they are in this eating, choice because of ethical animal rights reasons, they'll include those, which optimizes their iron, their zinc, their copper, their selenium, their iodine, their DHA, their vitamin A, their vitamin D. Like they'll optimize tons of nutrients just with like an additional 6 ounces of clams or oysters per week. Their fertility is like right back on board. They're good to go and they don't need to add in steak or anything else. So it's like think about think about the why and then where do you want to go from here? And I did include like a whole lot of hand holding and choosing if you want to reintroduce animal foods, what to do and why and how in that vegetarian chapter for people who want to go there. Um, I get it. Like I've been former vegetarian, friend and loved one to many currently practicing vegans. I go about this from a very like non-emotional, purely like this is the data. And then like where do you want to go from here? Like I try to hold people's hand through it because it's tricky.
That's so good. And I will make sure that because I have the book and I think it's amazing and I love how you've integrated a lot of I geek out on like the science and studies and understanding, why you do and how things work. So I love that the book is like deep dives into all that, but it doesn't feel like very, textbook sciency or whatever. So I'll make sure that that's linked in the show notes. But how can food choices, I mean, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but how can it support hormone balance, especially when it comes to like your progesterone levels and really just maintaining a strong luteal phase?
Yeah, so I mean, major consideration for keeping optimal progesterone levels, which ultimately impacts your luteal phase length and like the quality of your luteal phase, your risk for PMS, premenstrual spotting, all that. We need to touch on the foundations that we've already discussed. So you need to be getting enough protein. You definitely need to be getting enough fat. I don't like seeing dietary fat drop less than maybe 40% of calories. And that also holds true for men, by the way. A recent study came out, this came out since Real Food for Fertility went to print, showing that testosterone levels are best supported in men who are eating at least 40% of calories coming from fat as well. So same for both sexes. Get enough protein and don't take all the fat out of it. And like you're there, like you don't have to worry about it beyond that. So don't take the skin off your chicken. Don't cut all the fat off your steak. Like cook with a little butter when you're cooking your eggs. Don't throw away the yolks. Eat the fat with your dairy products. We have tons of data on optimized, improved fertility among women who are eating full fat dairy products, but that doesn't hold true for fat-free because guess what? We need the fat for hormones. We also need the vitamins A, D, E, and K in the dairy fat that helps support egg as well as sperm quality. So that's a big one. A huge one with luteal phase issues or progesterone is undereating, though. So if you cut your calories too much, even as little as like cutting your calories by 20, 25%, we see menstrual cycle disruption down the road. And that can happen in as little as a few months in some individuals. And if it goes on long enough and your calorie deficit is severe enough, we can see full on ovulation stops and the menstrual cycle stops, and you have hypothalamic amenorrhea, and that is purely the result of not eating enough calories relative to your energy needs. So that can be specifically under eating, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It can be over exercising, so you're expending a lot of energy and not eating enough to compensate. It can also be worsened by stress, especially in individuals whose response to stress is their appetite goes away or they just can't digest things well. And so that's a huge consideration would be like eating enough food. Vitamin B6, magnesium, zinc, omega-3 fats from fish, those can also play a role in supporting progesterone levels and ensuring the luteal phase is long enough. So you can have either optimizing your intake through food, that's my first choice, but supplemental amounts of those nutrients can also be helpful in certain situations.
I'm glad that you mentioned stress because that's always probably the predominant, I'm going to say issue, but maybe that's not the right word, but the concern or area of focus that I work on with clients because it's like they've spent all this money to have a reversal. They're hyper focused on everything. And should I go inverted? Should I use this cup? Should I do this? And tracking. And a lot of people will say anecdotally that they've noticed a huge change in their cycle since their husband had the reversal, which I liken to be caused by stress. And but when I ask people about, they even their messages to me come across as like I can sense stress, but they'll say
Yeah,
like, "Oh no, I'm not. I don't think I'm stressed or
yeah.
whatever." But it's like, well, how are you even sleeping? Because that obviously makes a huge impact on your blood sugar and all of the things. But I would say most of my clients or people that are listening are in that group of women who are, over 35 and they're just being told by their doctors that their fertility is going to fall off the cliff because of their age. And I mean, I just had a baby at 44, so I'm a big like, hey, that's not really true. But what kind of nutrition strategies would you recommend for a woman who's over 35 who maybe have been told like their AMH is, not ideal for fertility, so they just gotta like move into alternative methods. Are there sort of any specific tweaks that you would recommend for this age group?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, first of all, AMH is not fixed, and AMH is also something per the literature, it is more predictive of success with assisted reproductive technology. It's not associated with your success with natural conception. So AMH just doesn't tell like the full story. Try not to get too hyper focused just on your AMH and think like the sky is falling and I'm totally infertile forever and everything's terrible. It's just not true. Um, when it comes to aging, like yes, generally speaking, egg quality does start to decline. It is just a natural progression of our lives as women, where our fertile years are finite. Like that is true. That said, it's not like your fertility just like completely drops off a cliff after age 30 or 35. Um, I think during that time we need to focus even more on the areas where we can optimize egg quality because I know plenty of women who are in their late 30s and even 40s who are able to conceive. And a lot of it has to do with their metabolic health. We think about metabolic health in terms of like how well do our cells produce energy, and they do this via something called the mitochondria. And there's a number of different nutrients that support the mitochondria. The human egg cell has more mitochondria than any other cell in the body. It's like an energy powerhouse in there. And so we need to do everything we can to support that. Um, First and foremost, that starts by A, providing our bodies with enough energy, so don't starve yourself. B, focus on like the quality of your diet. We've already talked about really prioritizing the protein. Better quality fats is huge because oxidative stress can damage our eggs. So we want to be focusing on whole food sources of fat as much as possible. Saturated fat's actually protective. As I mentioned, monounsaturated fat is also protective. You find this in animal fats, and you also find it in things like avocado and olive oil and such. Um, Antioxidant nutrients like CoQ10 is hugely beneficial. That's one that can be supplemented. You do find it in some foods. heart, like heart from animal foods, is actually the richest dietary source of CoQ10 because animals, including humans, we have high amounts of CoQ10 in our heart because there's so much oxidation going on, and CoQ10 is keeping everything in balance there. So we have like a recipe in Real Food for Fertility for beef heart stew if you want to optimize your dietary intake, but it's something usually people are supplementing with. Vitamin D, I would get your vitamin D levels into a good place. I usually like to see them at 40 nanograms per mil, which is higher than typical lab cutoffs are like 30 or 32 nanograms per mil. So get your vitamin D levels up. You can check those and then either get more sun exposure, our main source, or supplement to get your levels up. We see huge improvements in egg quality among women who are keeping their vitamin D in a healthy range. Some other antioxidant nutrients that I think are worthy of mentioning, vitamin C. You get mostly that from your fresh produce, so take your pick. Vitamin E. Interestingly, vitamin E, we get it from nuts and seeds, but the main predictor of good vitamin E status is the quality of fat in your diet. So individuals who eat more saturated fat from whole foods, not like the ultra processed, cake made with whatever, they actually have better vitamin E status. And that's because saturated fat doesn't oxidize as easily. So you're not wasting your antioxidants fighting off all this oxidation caused by low quality fats. So if you're using more whole food fats, so the animal fats, the dairy fats, the olive oil, the avocado oil, the coconut oil versus the vegetable oils, you're going to preserve your body's vitamin E status because it's not wasted fighting all this unnecessary inflammation. So that's huge. And the biggest challenge outside of like just choosing to bring in less, vegetable oil laden products into your house is restaurants. Restaurants are usually cooking with really low quality oils. So one of the best things you can do is to simply cook more at home and eat out less at restaurants. If you are eating at restaurants, choosing things that are a bit more fresh and grilled instead of fried will help a lot on that front. I know I'm getting a bit long, but a few others that are worth mentioning. N-acetylcysteine is an amino acid. You find it in food as cysteine. You find that in high amounts in animal foods. So that alone can help. Some people supplement with NAC. It's a very safe supplement. There's tons of research on it in the fertility space. L-carnitine is another big one. You find carnitine in food, especially red meat, but it's also something that people supplement with. It's shown to improve egg quality and also embryo quality. They've used it in trials for women with PCOS, and it's highly beneficial. It's essentially an amino acid that helps your body oxidize fat better. So in tissues that are kind of like switching back and forth between burning glucose or burning fats, L-carnitine helps optimize fat oxidation. It also can be helpful in individuals who have more body fat on board, that when you're taking L-carnitine between meals after you've digested your food, your body's more able to tap into burning body fat stores for fuel. So it's a really cool one. I could keep going, but I know I'm kind of taking up a lot of time with my answer, but those would be some of like I think some of the heavy hitters for egg quality.
I love it. And obviously, we'll make sure that everybody knows where to find your book because it has so much good recipes and all the things in there as well. But for busy women who kind of feel overwhelmed that they have to eat perfectly to get pregnant, what would you say, or what would you recommend that that looks like in a realistic everyday sense?
So nobody eats perfectly, myself included. I already alluded to like buying an imperfect freezer meal because I'm lazy some days. Like nobody eats perfectly. I also eat out at restaurants, and no, I'm not in an area where all the restaurants are seed oil free. Literally none of them are seed oil free, right? So like we all make our compromises. I'd say one of the areas that I would focus on first that has the biggest impact would be to really prioritize your breakfast and fix your breakfast. A lot of women are not eating breakfast. They're having coffee as breakfast. Maybe they're specifically doing intermittent fasting and delaying or skipping breakfast altogether. And the biggest place that we can make an impact with hormones is to get a protein sufficient breakfast in the morning. I know you've seen it with your clients based on how you're nodding your head. I've seen it with my clients. I'm a broken record on a protein-rich breakfast because it makes such a huge difference. Like if you want to, you talked about the client who's like coming across very stressed in all the communications, but oh, I'm not stressed. Guess what contributes to you feeling stressed and having your cortisol through the roof all the time? It's not eating in the morning. Or if you're eating, you're not having any protein with it. So the people who are starting breakfast with like oatmeal or a smoothie that's all fruit with no protein, we're going to have a huge spike in our blood sugar and a crash. And when our body experiences that crash, or we've not eaten breakfast altogether and our blood sugar is crashing, guess what happens? Our body has like a built-in mechanism to release cortisol to drive like glucose release from your liver to keep you alive because you're like, oh, well, we don't know when the next meal's coming in. We got to bring the blood sugar back up. So you're in like a hyper stressed state. You add on to that having coffee without anything in your stomach and you drive up the cortisol even further. Well, cortisol isn't just a stress hormone, like it affects everything else. All of our hormones affect everything else. So we're going to drive up insulin resistance. That impacts your ovarian function. It impacts your thyroid function. It impacts your progesterone, your estrogen levels. So get breakfast. Get something in for breakfast that has protein. So that could be a breakfast focused on eggs. It could be a breakfast that has leftover meat from the night before. I personally love that. And I also usually crack an egg or two on top. It could be Greek yogurt or cottage cheese. You could make a smoothie that has protein powder in it, maybe some extra Greek yogurt, nut butter, something like get a good amount of protein in that smoothie. And then I've got no qualms with, with smoothies personally. But if you can just, even if you agree to it for like 2, 3 days, just give yourself 2, 3 days to experiment with this high protein breakfast idea and report back with how you feel. Because 9 times out of 10, people are like, wow, I feel so much better. I am not starving at 10 a.m. and going into the break room to have a donut. I'm not falling asleep at my desk at 2 p.m. I'm not so starving after dinner that I want to eat an entire container of peanut butter because you nourished yourself during the day. So that's my biggest recommendation is to just get breakfast figured out and then a lot of the other nutritional details figure themselves out or are less crucial because you got a good nourishing meal in first thing.
Yes, I love that. That's always my sort of go-to, especially for women who are skipping or just having coffee for breakfast. Like that will rock your whole world. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us and share all of your incredible wisdom. I would love for you to be able to share just how people can find you, social media or your website. I'll make sure it's in the show notes, but it's always nice for people who are driving just to throw it out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on my website, which is lilynicholsrdn.com. There's hundreds of blog articles up there. They're all free. There's no paywall on my site. If you want, like, there's a bunch of freebies too. So click on the freebies tab. You can download the first chapter of Real Food for Pregnancy there for free. Or if you want to check out Real Food for Fertility, we have the first chapter as a free download over at realfoodforfertility.com. So do check that out. I think most of what we talked about today was on the fertility side, and I will just mention that that book goes into just a ton of detail on all the different things to optimize fertility and clears up tons of the fertility myths that are out there. And we do go into egg quality. There's a whole chapter on that. We go into sperm quality. There's a whole chapter on that. All the common fertility challenges that can arise. There's a chapter on PCOS. There's a chapter on hypothalamic amenorrhea. There's a chapter on supplementation. Like there's all the questions that you have about fertility nutrition are probably answered there. So do check it out. As far as social media, you can find me mostly on Instagram, and my handle is the same as my website. So it's Lily Nichols RDN.
Awesome. Well, thanks again so much for taking the time to share all your wisdom and I'm excited because I know that something you said, probably more than one thing, is going to just be a light bulb moment for the woman that's been struggling and wanted a baby like yesterday. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me on Conceiving After Vasectomy Reversal. I hope you're feeling encouraged and more hopeful on your journey to growing your family. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who could use a little extra support. I absolutely love reading your reviews. They mean the world to me. Like, seriously, words of affirmation are my love language. So let's stay connected. Find me on Instagram at conceivingaftervr and join our Conceiving After Vasectomy Reversal Facebook community for even more support and encouragement. I believe that God placed the desire for a child on your heart for a reason, and I'm grateful to walk alongside you in this season, to encourage you, and to help you find joy in the journey, trusting that His plan is greater than we could ever imagine.
Thanks for listening.